Okay, we're live on Instagram, and then I'm going to be recording here. So we're just going to give this a few more minutes for people to start joining on here. I already see some of you guys joining. Hello. So today we're going to be diving into everything as far as the carnivore diet goes, and I have a really special guest. We have Dr. Cory of the Healing Couple, so he'll be joining in just a few seconds here on the Instagram Live for you guys to see. And then for anyone, if you have any questions, of course, just include that on here and we'll definitely answer any questions you have too.
Hey, Sucha.
Uh,
Hey, I was a few minutes late because I have about 10 devices that are connected to the internet. So I'm like, I gotta disconnect so that we can do this live and there's no skipping.
yeah, I feel that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me on. I'm super excited to be talking all things carnivore today.
Yeah, me too. And just so you guys kind of get a background, I know Cory and Jessica of the Healing Couple back in San Diego. So I'm sure we'll have some of our San Diego friends joining on here, as well as a bunch of different people we've connected with in not just the carnivore community, but just in our different communities, because we've both moved from San Diego actually. So you guys have moved out to Austin, Texas, and then I've moved out to Miami, Florida. So that's super exciting to just kind of like take what we're doing and run with it. Cory, if you want to just give like a quick intro of what you both do and then just like your journey to where you are right now.
Yeah. I graduated from medical school in 2015. I'd been seeing patients a little bit prior to that, so had about 8 years of experience, and then the pandemic hit. And at the time, I was really going back and forth with, do I want to see patients in person? Do I not? And so the pandemic gave me a beautiful gift of now being able to see patients not just in San Diego at the time, but all over the country. And I was really starting to notice the impact that metabolic health was having on my patients, especially living in and experiencing their sedentary existence because of the pandemic, just less movement, less exercise, people were staying inside. And so I started to really develop a different relationship with food in a whole new way. And I tried all sorts of diets that I'm sure that we'll talk about today. But I found myself in this wonderful realm of sharing about health and wellness, just like you, on the internet, and reaching people all over the world. So I have a business with my partner, Jessica, that I'm sure people on this chat know really well. And we focus a lot on meditation and breath work and using different techniques and strategies, not to just let go of stress and anxiety, but actually amplify your vibration in your life. And so, really, as a naturopathic physician and she's a yoga teacher, we've come together and created this beautiful business together. So, I love and talk about all things health. And this is actually the first time I've ever gone on a platform or spoken to somebody else about the carnivore diet and really the inner workings of it, not just the superficial conversation. So I'm excited to begin.
Yeah, me too. I'm super excited and thank you for taking the time today and for diving in. And not only did I have Cory on here because he's an amazing friend of mine, but also I think it's an amazing background he has with naturopathic medicine, but also diving into breath work. And those are such huge feels. The breath work is something that's so primal to us. And I know we're going to dive into this as far as like talking about this diet, but also a background with naturopathic medicine, which is different than the typical, possible medical advice that we might get, or like what a typical doctor might provide. So I think that's a really cool kind of bridge between, and then also like hearing about your journey. So I'd love to dive into as far as like what your background with health is. And I'm talking more about like personal experiences, like if you've dealt with any health issues in the past, and then what maybe have you tried to try to overcome that?
Yeah, my journey really began when I was a little kid in the Midwest. And I was 13 years old. And at the time, my mom was a nurse. And she was an RN, worked in the NICU. And she was kind of like my superhero. She worked nights, and then during the day, she took care of me and my brother, packed our lunches, and then she was practicing to run marathons. So at the time, she was like doing it all. And I'll never forget, like, there was this moment when right around when I was 13 when she started to slow down, have less energy, be more irritable, have less focus. She started to gain weight, and I'm seeing a lot of hearts there. I'm sure a lot of people have either seen this in their parents or experienced it themselves. She just started to not be herself, and like that was really hard as a 13-year-old for me to see my superhero like lose superpowers. And we, with her, went on this long health journey of seeing a lot of specialists, a lot of doctors that I think had good intentions, but they didn't have the answers that we were looking for. And she went through some really difficult things of being misdiagnosed with cancer, misdiagnosed with all sorts of conditions and diseases. And then she got slapped with this disease or condition, which is called fibromyalgia. And fibromyalgia is a disease of exclusion. And that's really just a fancy term for, hey, we've tried to figure out what's going on with you, but we don't know what that is. So here's a diagnosis so that you can feel better. I mean, that's really how I feel about chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, those types of conditions. They're a diagnosis of exclusion. And so at the time, I was super excited as a kid because I was like, oh, okay, my mom got diagnosed. Now she's going to get better. And that didn't happen. And I felt like the more doctors that she saw, the worse she got. So I started to have this really bad association with the health system, medical doctors. Like, I was like, aren't they supposed to heal people? Aren't they supposed to help my mom? And I saw her get sicker and sicker to the point where she was bedridden for a whole year on muscle relaxers, painkiller medications, antidepressants. And she became like a totally different person, Sucha. So hard for me to see. As a 13-year-old, I decided to just get resourceful. So I like was asking people, getting on phone calls, and we were able to actually help my mom find a chiropractor at the time. And this chiropractor was just a little knowledgeable enough in the realm of alternative medicine that she was able to get my mom on a diet, start her on some anti-inflammatory supplements and medication, and she started to get better. And so I, at the time, didn't even know what a chiropractor was. And so I started to look into those realms of medicine. And then the rest was history. I mean, I was like convinced at that time, like, okay, natural medicine, there's something to this. I don't know what it is because my entire family was traditional medicine, doctors, nurses, nurse anesthetists. So I didn't have a lot of backing and support from my family, so I had to go figure it out for myself. And so I applied for medical school. There's four accredited naturopathic medical schools, and so I went to essentially a traditional medical school for 2 years, basic training, and then I did 3 more years of medical. Am I skipping, Sucha, a little bit? I think I'm skipping.
Just a little bit, but I can hear just a little
Just a
bit.
little
Yeah.
bit. Is it okay? Yeah.
Yeah,
So I
you're
did
good.
5 years of medical school. And at the time, like you think, oh, Cory, you're going to alternative naturopathic medical school. Like that should be like, you should be getting vitamin D and sunshine and like taking care of yourself. And I got more sick than I had in my entire life. And I was approaching my 30s at the time. And this was right around the time that I saw my mom get sick. The same thing started to happen to me, Sucha. So it was like really an eerie kind of like, wow, like I saw my mom go through this, I'm going through this. There was something genetically going on. And I toughed out medical school and like barely got through it. Found out that I had an autoimmune disease called eosinophilic myalgia. And it's where my immune system attacks my joints, kind of like rheumatoid arthritis in a way, but it's a lot more rare. And so I took all the supplements, I did all the diets, experienced all the things, and I would say that I did get better, but there was always something lingering in the back of my mind of like, I shouldn't be in pain every day. I shouldn't have brain fog every day when I'm taking $500 of supplements. You know, I shouldn't feel like I have low libido when I exercise and I get my hormone levels checked every 6 months. And so I started to play this game in my head of like, maybe there, you know, naturopathic medicine really helped me discover a lot of things, but maybe there was something else out there that I was really needing and looking for. So I started to listen to my body that way. And about, I would say a year ago, I got introduced to the carnivore diet.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Like, I really resonate on that as far as, you know, I wasn't dealing with anything that I thought was so intense. I had normalized so many symptoms that I was feeling for so long. And I come from the background of a more vegan, plant-based diet, but there's so many things that I thought were normal. And I know gut health is like a big thing, but even digestive processes and like how difficult that should be. Or for me being in the fitness industry, like, you know, how easy or hard should it be to get in the protein or to feel nourished or to feel energy? And it was a really big eye opener to transition this way, because just like you, whether it was supplements, and I've actually worked with a supplement company to like even have easy access to that, but still like I feel like I just like I'm trying all of these things and obsessed with like the biohacking and, you know, like optimizing everything, but it's still so much effort to feel like what I think is healthy. And then like really experiencing benefits and just like a couple of months in on this diet, I'm like, it didn't have to be that hard. Like, and also all of these things that I thought I normalized, that I thought I was going to experience forever. And I was like, whoa, like I'm not destined to experience all of these things forever. It's not something that I just have to like kind of comply for and give up with. Like we can feel that like superhuman version of ourselves. I'm curious, like, so what are some of the things you notice, like compared to how you were eating before, what your, you know, your pre-carnivore diet was like, and then how you are now? I think you froze up a little bit. Let's see here if you come back. And for anyone else, feel free to keep adding in any questions you have. I know until Cory comes back, I can just answer this. So one of the questions was like, how many, maybe he will rejoin. But one of the questions was like, how much protein should I get as far as like carnivore grams of protein versus plant-based protein? Oh, there you are. I'm just answering one of the questions until you rejoin on the Instagram live. So as far as protein, you still want to get the same amount of protein, but it really just depends on, you know, the quality and how it's making you feel and how many sources you're getting it from. So this is something that is going to be different for everybody, as far as like your physical exertion level, if you're healing something, but typically you're going to want however much your lean muscle mass is and that many grams of protein. Ooh, this is a good question. Sweta asked, how has the carnivore diet affected your meditation process or practice? I feel like it's definitely given you like so much peace, like at least for me. I thought I was destined to feel like so much digestion like process going on, and gas and bloat and all of these things. I'm sure Cory is going to have some good feedback on this one as well. He should be joining in any second right now. Okay,
Hey,
there you are.
we're better now. We're better. Sorry about that. Where are we at, Sucha?
That's okay. Yeah. So while you were gone for a second, I was just answering some questions that we had asked.
Yeah.
One of them I was addressing was like protein ratio. So someone asked like how much animal protein versus plant-based protein should you have? And I think you'll have a great answer as far as this goes, because I was kind of going in the direction of like we still need the same amount of protein depending on what our activity is like and where we're at in life, but the
Right.
quality of the protein can make a big difference, and we might have to spend less time like looking for that complete protein. But if you have any thoughts on this, and then I have a different question I'll get to after this.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say that there really is no comparison, unfortunately, because you're right. It has to do with the quality of the protein. And there's just nothing comparable to eating animal protein versus plant-based protein. There's just so much extra fiber, whether it's soluble or insoluble, that is in plant protein that takes up the bulk of the actual substance, especially when you're talking about protein powders that are plant-based. So for me, I've really switched my mindset on talking about quantity even in my diet, where I am a big proponent of quality. So the more that you can search out that quality, the better. Yeah, that's how I would answer that question. Now, I think in the past, I would have said like, oh, 1 gram per pound of body weight per day. But for me, it's more based upon the quality rather than the quantity.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And that's something that, again, being in the fitness industry, like we're preached like 1 pound of body weight per, and then get that gram of protein in. But the quality matters so much. And we talk a lot about like amino acids and essential nutrients. But just to give you a little example, I would take so much effort to create this like amazing vegan bowl with like 10 different ingredients with all of the proteins and all of the essential nutrients, but then realizing like just and I used to be really against red meat, but so it's kind of crazy to say this, but just one piece of, let's even say, steak has basically all of the essential nutrients I need, whereas I would have tried to look for that in all of these other ingredients, and in those ingredients it wasn't even as bioavailable. The
Right.
other question that's really common that I get, if you want to address this, is as far as like the breakdown of protein. And some people are like, oh, I take a lot more time to break down this, animal meat, but it's a more sustainable version of that energy. And there's a big thing between just fast energy or actual nourishment and nutrients for you. So if you have anything to say as far as like the breakdown of that.
Yeah, and I think when people ask that question, they're probably in some sort of middle ground with their diet, meaning that they're still eating maybe quite a bit of plant nutrition or grain in their diet, and then trying to incorporate in more meat. And I think that's where most people struggle, is when you're trying to flex on both sides of the spectrum. And so when you're eating something that has grain. So most people love like let's talk about like spaghettis and meatballs, like an Italian meal, right? You're going to have a lot of grain in that spaghetti, and grain is broken down in a very different way in the gut, in the digestive tract, than is something like an elk steak or a pound of organic grass-fed. There's different like just chemical processes that occur in the gut. And so when you try to do that all at once, your experience of eating more meat is, oh, it's hard for my gut to break down, or I feel like I have like a pit in my stomach, and you'll have types of symptoms. But what I would say is really try to focus on cutting out those carbohydrates, especially the simple carbohydrates in the beginning of your carnivore journey, so that your body can more quickly adapt to breaking down those amino acids and fats. Because essentially, yes, our proteins and fats a denser type of nutrition? Absolutely. When you want to talk about macros, there's more calories in protein and fat, or a more of an animal-based food. And like you said, it's more sustainable. So you don't have to eat as much. And so being as you flex from eating more of a SAD diet, more American diet with higher carbohydrates, and you flex to more of a carnivore, I struggle with this too. You technically eat less, like, because the food is so dense. So your experience of it may be, oh my gosh, like this is really hard, or I feel like I need to eat more. It's because your gut has been conditioned to eat things like gluten, and gluten expands in your gut. So you're used to, oh, my stomach feels this way, so then I'm full, rather than eating dense nutrition like a carnivore diet, where it takes up actually less square footage within your gastrointestinal tract. Yeah.
Yeah, and really good points here. And just, coming from like a plant-based perspective, I've had people say like, well, we were meant to eat like all the plants. But if you've heard of, and we can
Well,
dive into like,
I would argue with that. We're meant to eat all the plants. How many actual plants can we eat comparative to the plants that are on the planet? Do you know?
I saw like a pie chart and it was like insane how many like plants can actually kill us versus animals, right? And like obviously human intelligence and primal living takes a big factor. And what I was going to dive into is even like the best quality meats for us happen to be like ruminant animals. And ruminant animals are the ones that have several compartments in their stomach. So even if they're vegetarian animals, ruminants means it's like they have multiple stomachs to digest grass and break it down. And like I was definitely guilty of taking like wheatgrass shots until realizing now like that's like the biggest joke ever, because we're just not meant to have grass in the first place, period. And I think once we experience this, it's a game changer. I got a question on here that was really interesting that you might have some input on. And I listened to a podcast the other day that was like very resonant of this, but Steph asked, have you heard of eating for your blood type? And yes, I have heard of that. However, like, and I'm curious your perspective, Cory, the explanation was basically like, if you think about a lion out in the wild or a deer out in the wild or even a cow, each of those animals has a diet. So humans, we have a diet that we thrived on that allowed us to evolve. In the past 200 years, we've had all this agriculture and mass production and commercialization that have altered or given us other diet, opportunities or options, but we have a human diet. So regardless of our blood type, I believe there was a diet that just any human could generally thrive on. I feel this is why the carnivore diet is kind of the ultimate elimination diet too. I've had some people say like, well, you can eat whole food plant-based and thrive on whole grains and nuts and seeds and legumes. But what about for those people who are literally allergic to nuts or certain plants, like, and they get a reaction, or gluten, of course, like what are they going to do? I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think the underlying conversation with this, and this is something that I got very humbled by because of my medical school background and all the education that I learned about with like plants and nuts and seeds, is that plants are very toxic and plants can't move. And when Paul Saladino and Sean Baker, who are two MDs that I follow, yep, lots of love for those guys, right? They said the most simple thing, which is plants can't run away. So what would their defense mechanisms be? And I was like, oh my gosh, like, well, square one, to start off with, square one is that they contain cellulose, and each single cell of a plant, no matter what they are wrapped in what's called cellulose. It's an incredibly like fibrous capsule that is undigestible by human beings. So we as human beings cannot digest cellulose, but bacteria can. And I know I'm going off on a little tangent here, and I'll come back to your diet question, which is, if plants' main component is cellulose, and plants can't run away, and they obviously have all these other toxins that we can talk about, and we can't break them down, but only gut bacteria can. More than likely, there are going to be gut bacteria that proliferate in our gut to break that down. And what is the byproduct of those bacteria? Because all I saw as a naturopathic physician seeing patients one-on-one is gut dysbiosis, irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's disease, constipation, small bacterial, intestinal bacterial overgrowth. All these types of things are proliferating right now as I see the vegan and plant-based movement go up and up and up. And so being that catch net and seeing all those patients start to come in my door with these consistent problems, and for me to be able to say, hey, cut plants out of your diet, essentially do an elimination diet, a carnivore diet, and see what happens, and all those symptoms reduced, was a huge eye opener for me. And so coming back to your question about like, okay, like, is there really a diet for everyone? Is there a diet that, let's just say like a caveman diet, a cave woman diet, a cave person diet that we used to be sustained on? Yes. Yes. Yes, there is. For hundreds of thousands of years, we were hunter-gatherers. And so we used to eat off the land. We never used to take cassava root and then grind it down into a powder that has cyanide, by the way. So cassava flour, all this rage with cassava flour, just wait to see there being more autoimmune conditions and energy issues and people with fatigue syndrome eating lots of cassava in crackers, chips, tortillas. I mean, come on, it's right in front of your face. We used to hunt and we used to gather. So what was ever present in the land, we used to consume. And that would be, you know, antelope, bison. We used to eat a lot of honey. We used to eat anything that flowered, right? So fruits, squashes, acorn squashes, things that are a lot more digestible for our system, I think is the way to go. And this is the first time in my life where I've ever said that. Like, yeah, there's usually a universal place where we can start, and I would say that is like a carnivore diet, animal-based diet.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's like, yeah, crazy, like just coming from like a plant-based vegan perspective and jumping into this. And it's like, I never thought I would actually go about an entire day without a single vegetable. But it's like, it's crazy. And we'll dive into, you know, a lot of the benefits and stuff. I had a question pop up that is really important to address. And I think there's so many layers to this, but obviously like a big component of why a lot of people choose not to eat animals, it's why I did, is like the environmental aspect of it and animal lives. And
Yeah.
a really simple, just from my perspective, and you can kind of talk about, you know, how you go about this, is the idea that I used to think being vegan was the solution after realizing that monocrop agriculture, let's say avocados that are grown abundantly for humans, but in order to even sustain that one avocado farm, thousands of animals have to be killed, because there's obviously animals who are going to try to go after fruit, you know, or any kind of edible vegetable or fruit, edible. So with that, like, there's going to be animals killed regardless. That's going to be unsustainable for the environment. If almonds don't grow in abundance, why are we mass producing like almond milk and almond butter, right? And it's not something that should even be taken like that. On the other hand, diving into regenerative agriculture has been an absolute game changer. Regenerative agriculture basically is that, you know, these animals are coexisting, and then the earth is literally being regenerated to, you know, not only help with climate change, but improve the soil, conserve water, and then have a happier life for the animals. So this is obviously going to, I feel, be investment up front. Meat wasn't supposed to be cheap. However, when you get to reap the benefits of eating, you know, carnivore based, you realize that all of the extra stuff you don't need anymore. When I was plant based, I used to have tons of sauces and dips and all of these different things in the fridge.
Your fridge
And I'm
was
like, yeah. And then realizing like I just need 1 or 2 ingredients maybe even to sustain me like for the entire week. And then there's so much less waste. I literally secrete less waste myself, like my own footprint, which is crazy. And it's a big thing that people notice. So I'm curious, like, how you go about this, and then also if you can dive into like what you choose to kind of eat, what you're currently eating. I know you experience like full-on carnivore and then also reincorporating some other things.
Yeah. I want to touch a little bit on what you had talked about, and what Chef Bay had a great question about, like, what is the actual sustainability? Let me actually read this. What about the animal welfare, absolutely environmental side to eating this much meat? Yes. So where I would say the whole separation occurred was when we took agriculture, right? Growing, mass production of growing of plants, and then pasteurization. So like pasteurized animals, where we took the animals away from the plants. When we separated them, that's when we created this fracturing of how we eat and sustain ourselves. So I'm a huge proponent, like you said, Sucha, of rotational agriculture, where you bring the animals and the plants together so that you can actually regenerate soil. Now, I'm going to be very critical of this movement because we haven't quite figured out a way to do it on a mass scale.
Yeah.
What I do like that I've seen in the scientific literature is that when you want to talk about saving the planet, if we could figure out a way to get rotational agriculture and like crop rotation with animals, if we could figure out a sustainable way to do that in mass production, we would save the planet, because there's no other mechanism that I know of that can capture as much carbon, as much CO2 carbon into the soil than doing something like that. So, for instance, a lot of the farms that I purchase meat from, there's one in Nevada, there's one in California, they're net carbon zero. Like, they are completely neutral. And you can't say that about mass farmed production, whether it's corn, soy, GMO, kale, anything vegan or plant-based. You can't say that.
Nuts.
And
Yeah.
I know, and my mom, her family, they're all farmers. So they're up in Canada, and they've been farming for the last 80 years. And so what I have experienced from just being on their farms, listening to them talk, is that they want to get to a more sustainable way to farm, and they know of these practices. It's just unfortunate because big pharma and big agriculture companies like Monsanto that produce GMO crops, people don't understand. You can't grow crops without constantly purchasing from these companies, meaning that every year you have to buy seed for that planting season. And that crop, you can't just grow it and then from whatever surplus, you take more seeds and grow it on your own. You can't do that. You will be sued into oblivion, and they will take your farm from you. So all these farmers are so handicapped in their ability to grow or create a sustainable agriculture because of these companies and the legal loopholes that they've created. And the GMO crops, where literally you have to buy their seed every single year. So you're so handicapped by the process. So for me, in being a carnivore eater, like 80% of my diet, 85% of my diet now is completely meat-based or organ-based. I am a huge proponent of how can we marry the farmers with the ranchers and bring that ecosystem back together. So that's what I really am looking for. But we're not there yet, because the way, for me, Sucha, if I have to be 100% transparent, how you probably eat and definitely how I eat, I know is not possible for everyone, because I have financial resources and the knowledge to do so. And so we need to start spreading some of these concepts so that we can create more sustainable models for our future. And I think, like you said, crop rotation, cattle rotation is one way to do that.
Yeah, that's I'm total in agreement to everything you just said. And you're right. Like, we're not there yet. And also, the way that, and that's why like there's these extremes like the carnivore diet or being like really animal based, is because in order to make it financially work for you, in order to be sustainable, you have to be what to our society now is an extreme, even if it was an extreme like 200 300 years ago, but right now it's an extreme. So if we wanted to still kind of participate in society, if that makes sense, with like eating out once in a while, or even if that means like making it affordable to our lifestyle, like there's not, we can't necessarily like, let's say, purchase an entire cow right now and make that sustain, or purchase an entire elk, right? That would
Right.
be ideal, because we've lost so much of our connection as far as like the hunting process and actually like letting that one animal sustain us for so long. Instead, we're kind of getting, different bits and pieces. But with more education, like what we're doing right now, and just like getting people familiar with regenerative agriculture, and also bringing awareness how like maybe eating vegan isn't the end all be all solution. It's definitely better, don't get me wrong, than the typical Western diet that has processed meats, fast food, all of those things. Like a whole food plant-based diet would be able to do a lot of healing. But as far as like taking that even one step further and really getting that quality, essential nutrients, and even being sustainable in certain ways, then this is an amazing path to kind of dive into, or just gain more awareness about.
Yeah, and what I do want to bring up around like just the controversies between like being a vegan versus being a carnivore, because those are both on both extremes, right? And for the average individual that's listening to this, or not the average, everybody's amazing, but like just the person who's eating an average diet, like just do me a favor when you go grocery shopping the next time, and don't don't judge yourself at all. Just get your regular groceries and then look at your grocery cart and tell me, what is the percentage of items that you've purchased that are in boxes, that are packaged inside plastic or cardboard? Because I can tell you right now, those are more than likely highly processed foods that have been adulterated from their original state, created, pressed, and squeezed, and juiced, and concentrated for your consumption. And if you really want to get your health back, like I feel you have, Sucha, in a huge way, how I have, the best thing for you to do is get back to the basics and start eating foods that are in their more natural form. And the thing is, why I'm now more of a carnivore versus vegan when it comes to even like plant-based or whole-based foods, is that the plants that you're eating, kale, wheat, uh, tofu, like I'm not even going to list some of the like worse foods, right? Those weren't available 60 years ago,
Yeah.
70
Kale and
years,
tofu used to be my life.
right? They didn't exist, Sucha.
Yeah.
So when you want to talk about the fact that we're these 2 million-year-old beings that have been walking around the planet for so long, and you're now consuming 80% of your diet is highly processed, concentrated, modified foods, and even maybe the 20% or 30% that you are eating that's more whole based foods, but it's more plant based. Those foods have not existed until recently. Your system, genetically, molecularly, like just biologically, is going to have a hard time processing those foods and getting the nutrition that your body needs. And that was a wake up call for me, because when I went carnivore, I'll never forget it. I was like, okay, I'm going to try this, because I went straight vegan for 6 months and it didn't work for me. But I remember doing not just like grass-fed, grass-finished beef, like for 4 to 6 weeks straight, but I remember when I started to include organs into my diet as well, it was like I stuck my thumbs in an electrical outlet. I felt so much sustained energy consistently, mood elevated, sex drive elevated, like everything was like coming online. And it was the first time I could tell myself, oh, I feel like I'm at 100%. Like gut inflammation went down. I lost probably like 5 pounds in water weight just because I wasn't consuming those carbohydrates anymore. And so it was just a huge, huge revelation for me. And so I hope as you're grocery shopping, don't judge yourself. Don't like, be like, oh, why can't I be like Cory and Sucha? Just observe it and just really see it for what it is. And then if you feel comfortable, make the switch. Because like you said, I don't have any waste anymore. And that makes me so excited. I don't waste any food. Like what I purchase is what I consume. And so for me, if I had to actually look at my budget and how much I spend, it's a little bit more, but it's not like 50% more, 60% more. I probably spend like an extra $200 a month, if I'm being honest. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, if we think about health long term, like I think any diseases or injuries or like so many things that we try to deal with, just as an example, even for females, like for example, and I'm sure guys deal with this too. I think females talk more about skin health, but like, having clear skin is definitely like a big priority. And for the past 2-3 months, like clearest skin I've ever had before. But to think how big even the skin industry is, as far as like, oh, this is not working, put this product on. Oh, this is not working, put this product on. And you ladies have seen like how expensive these products are, but like what's an extra, whether it's $50 to a $200 or however you want to take the animal-based journey goes. 2 weeks ago, I woke up and I had the craziest thing. I woke up and I had no phlegm. And I've been dealing with underlying phlegm for, I don't even remember when I've never used to have it, because I've had it my entire life and I even identified with it. Hormones, period cycles, these are all things that I've been sharing about for people who are a little bit more interested in this. But so many things that basically just this change alone has created. But Cory, that was such a great piece of advice as far as like, not putting pressure on yourself and judging yourself, but take those small, like changes, going to the grocery store, looking at your shopping cart. And one thing to add to that, if you focus on the outskirts of the grocery store versus
Yes.
like the insides, that's where you'll find all of the more whole, non-processed, fresh ingredients that actually go bad if you don't freeze them. Whereas all of the packaged stuff, the closer you get to the middle, that's where it's at. So that's kind of just like a general tip. And then also like asking yourself what's seasonal, paying attention to that. A question a little bit before it was like asking what are these animals or the ruminants that I was referring to. And ruminants would refer to primarily anything that would be classified as like red meat. So those are the animals typically. I actually don't consume chicken myself. I think those are one of the most factory farmed animals. The fact that you can get chicken so cheap is absurd too. And as far as essential nutrients goes, something like I actually started to incorporate like venison in my diet. And I know that's something we talked about. And you're right, as far as the energy and like just everything that's turned on is insane. And so that's my general thing is, for people who think they are thriving, just trying something new and seeing like, hey, have I actually like reached my optimal? Are these symptoms that are like continuing to bug me? Do I need to like live with these forever? And you don't, but sometimes like trying something new can give you that opportunity.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. It really just comes down to like just sitting with yourself and being aware of how you're feeling. And I want to let you know, after $390,000 in education, like you think you know something until you don't know it. And this was one of the biggest holes that I had in my personal health. And I was spending the money on supplements. I was seeing the doctors. I was getting the lab test done, but I didn't go back to the basics. And now that I understand how agriculture and animals got separated, how we've arrived to this really weird place of like promoting plant-based foods as a staple in your diet is very confusing to me because, like you said, cows, ruminants, they have 4 or 5 stomachs. The way that our guts are set up, our guts are much more closely linked to our predator species relatives like cats and lions and tigers and bears than it is a cow or a ruminant. And so, do I think that plants are an absolute no all the time? No. I mean, like, if you want to go out and experience like all the wonders that we have as far as restaurants in the United States, then by all means, go for it. But for me, in the autoimmune disease that I had, because I feel like it's in almost complete remission now by being on the carnivore based diet and really just refining my nutritional palate, then go for it. And I think that just so your audience can know what the carnivore based diet is really helpful for and what kind of benefits it can create for you. I think that for people that are struggling with autoimmune disease, man, just try the carnivore diet. Like, get some good advice from your doctor, a nutritionist, obviously get some support there. I wouldn't recommend maybe doing it solo, but try the carnivore diet. It can be incredibly helpful at regulating and modulating your immune response, because it doesn't create other inflammatory factors that plants cause. So plants have what are called antioxidants, but really they're plant toxins. They're preventative so that plants don't want to be eaten, right? And so focusing on that kind of diet can be really helpful. It's also really helpful for boosting hormone levels. So you talked about your skin, especially for women, hormone levels, hormone balancing is incredibly important. And so the carnivore diet does a really good job at modulating that. Why? It's because plants affect your hormones. Nobody wants to talk about that. Plants have something called xenoestrogens. They affect your estrogen levels. They also have what are called goitrogens. Most green leafy vegetables have something called goitrogens in them that affects your thyroid levels, which also affects your sexual hormone levels. So if you're struggling with like acne, heavy periods, for instance, my partner was really struggling with that, and she's been on the carnivore diet for 3 months. She had a little rough time this month, but overall it's been really helpful for her. And I would also say just energy levels and mental clarity. If you're feeling sluggish and you feel like it's hard for you to get up every morning, try the carnivore diet, because more than likely you're very carbohydrate rich with what you're consuming and you're protein deficient. So get on the carnivore diet and start to give your body dense nutrition that it needs, including, especially for men, low iron is such a chronic problem in plants. If you're in a plant-based diet, it's sucking up all your iron. And when you eat carnivore based and you are consuming something like venison or elk that has about 5 to 10 times the concentration of iron compared to regular protein sources, you're going to feel it. And it's going to affect your red blood cells, which carry oxygen to your tissues, including your brain. And you're going to feel like on fire. You're going to feel amazing. So I can't say enough about the carnivore diet and what it can do. But I will say that, sometimes it's not for everyone. So if you're in a situation where you need to be really careful on the amount of protein that you're consuming, so people that have kidney disorders or real severe chronic kidney issues, definitely speak to a professional. If you're going through a cancer treatment protocol where you're maybe have a hormone dominant type of breast cancer or tumor, definitely consult with your physician before starting something like this. So this isn't for everyone, but I think that on the whole, we need to start having people eat more dense nutrition so that they can start living a more active life.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah,
Yeah.
everything to what you said. Totally in agreement with that. That's all super awesome, and I appreciate that so much. One last question to wrap this up. That was a great question, and it was basically, how do you start reincorporating meat in your diet if you haven't been eating it for a while? And I think this is different for people. I would have maybe done it a little bit differently, but I had a really interesting story where I was traveling and I was actually forced into a place where I didn't have everything that Whole Foods or Trader Joe's has to offer. I only had stuff that was seasonal. I wasn't doing grains and legumes because rice and beans don't sit well with me, and I didn't want the excess carbs. So I actually started reincorporating eggs and then some seafood, which I just myself love a lot, like the salmon. But I literally just like really took it like 1 month at a time, and it was almost just very experimental. And I think that can be really nice. Just like the elimination diet, you're just slowly introducing things back in. I was very resistant to red meat, and I hadn't had it really ever except maybe an In-N-Out burger when I was younger. So to taste like actual steak, and then most recently like venison, was super different for me, which is like kind of like elk. But feeling how that feels for me, and then realizing that I didn't even want that many eggs in my diet, which I was having a lot of, that didn't actually sit as well. So really treating it like a transitionary period. And I would say the other really big thing, if you want to touch on this and whatever you have, would be metabolism is super huge, and getting fat adapted, because obviously having more protein and fat when you're used to having a really carb heavy diet is going to be a switch. So you're going to go through a transition where your body needs to learn how to fuel and energize itself differently from more fats versus versus a lot of carbs. And also like being careful to say, like, if you are having a lot of proteins, but make sure your fats are up there too. I would say that's really important. But whatever you have as far as transition tips for people, Corey.
Yeah, I would say don't follow what I did, which is I went like straight carnivore. I'm okay with dealing with the adaptation and some of the like symptoms that you can feel. It just feels like a transition, right? And your body can feel a little wonky going from one energy source to the other. But I think you made a really good point, and this is what I would recommend as well, is focus less on, oh my gosh, I have to transition to more meat. I would say start to take out some of the more carbohydrate rich sources of food that you're eating. So if you're doing like the pastas and the cereal and the breads, like those areas are really helpful just to lower your body's carbohydrate consumption so that it will start focusing, burning more proteins and fats. And then a nice transition point too, and you had mentioned this, is seafood. And we haven't even talked about this. So on the carnivore diet, you don't have to be like us and eat venison and elk. Like seafood, fish, shrimp, clams, scallops and scallops are incredibly sustainable, by the way. And if you're worried about like, oh, I don't want to eat animals, like animal cruelty, scallops existed way before any type of mammal. So, and they also are way less intelligent than any live creature known to man. So there you go, scallops. So seafood is a really great source of protein, and it tends to be less fatty, so you don't experience that difficult transition. Where you can run into trouble is if you go to the barbecue joint, oh, I'm carnivore now, and I'm gonna go straight to the barbecue joint, and I'm gonna eat a grain-fed, super fatty beef rib, right? That's where you can run into trouble. So doing less carbohydrates, fish, and then getting into more of the red meats. And of course, just like you had said, I'm a huge fan of grass-fed, grass-finished beef. I'm a fan of lamb, as well as I strictly right now just eat elk because I'm getting my meat from Durham Ranch, which is in New Zealand, and it's on a regenerative farm, so it's completely sustainable. And so I just buy the 10-pound logs, and I consume that on a regular basis. So yeah, transition your way through. And the other thing that I would say that I didn't add in immediately is organ. Organ, a
Yeah.
huge part of this conversation that we're missing, which is yes,
Most
meat,
fail.
yes, meat is nutrient dense, but I think the missing factor for most people when they switch to carnivore is organs, because it has so much vitamin A, vitamin C, all the minerals, all the B vitamins. It even has other B vitamins that most people have never heard of before, like inositol, BP157, the amino acid profile. So I've replaced all my normal supplementation, like all of my like fake vitamins, to now I do desiccated organ supplements, which means that they take the gross organs, they freeze dry them, grind them down into capsules, so it's much more palatable. So I consume like 6 to 12 caps of liver, bone marrow, and then kidney tallow, and that has been a massive shift for me as well, in being able to transition and sustain the diet.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree with all of that. I've tried the supplements for the organs, and I think like eating nose to tail is such a big part of it. I personally am just like so fascinated with the primal studies. And I think once you start eating in this way and your body adapts, you'll feel like it's just so, for majority of people, you'll feel like it really resonates and it feels right for you. So like I've been even sharing, but like getting the actual beef liver or the actual bone marrow is something I've been experimenting as of recently, and it's pretty fun. I mean, my dog eats like something very similar. I give him like the rest of the bone, but even just learning different ways to like eat it, and it feels like I'm so much more connected with the earth because I'm like consuming everything instead of just like, just one little part of the animal. But these are all such great points and tips, and I want to be respectful of your time, Cory, because I really appreciate all of this information. It's been absolutely amazing, and I was seriously mind blown when I heard you were doing this, because this is such a big transition, and I know coming from the communities that we do, it's definitely not something that everyone talks about or dives into. But this was super fun to nerd out about you and just hear all of this amazing information. And I really appreciate everyone who asked questions and who took the time to be open-minded to tune in about this. Any other things you want to share, Cory?
I want to say that I love the discussion, so thank you so much for being a part of that. And I think you're a real stand for not a diet or a lifestyle, but you're really all about your well-being and the well-being of your community. And so I want to let anybody know who's like listening to this right now that like, Sucha, you're the real deal, and you're willing to have the conversations that not a lot of people are willing to have. And you've really inspired me to come on here and talk about this with you. Because really at the end of the day, we need to talk about solutions, not only for ourselves and our own diet, but for the world, and figure out, you're right, like what is the most sustainable and what is going to get us metabolically healthy and back on track. So thank you so much for having me on and sharing this with your community. I can't wait. We should do it again sometime.
We should. And you guys, like, just to wait, because in the future we might do something that's like an in-person experience I think that would be really fun. Because if you guys haven't experienced breath work, go check out the Healing Couple, because you'll meet Jessica on here eventually. I'm curious if she'll be down to share her experience with this one day. But like, just everything they offer, I think, is absolutely amazing. So primal as well. So thank you so much again, Cory, and thank you for everyone for tuning in.
Yeah, that was a nice little sneak in there. We might have to do a retreat in the future. All right, thank you.
It's on my mind.
Bye, everybody.
All right, bye.